Following on from the last video, I'm now reading The Psychic Awakening the Greater Good, and this is the Imperial perspective. The Fox Containment. Fox was in the grip of rebellion. The Great Rift had brought panic and fear, its ominous presence in the skies shattering the population's sense of safety. All contact with the wider Imperium was lost, though the planet's governor, Zula Hatia, had no reason to believe she would not continue to meet her tithe requirements. Densely populated Fox was a mining world in the Pecan system. A key planet in the region, it had produced vast quantities of promethium and metals for use in munitions for thousands of years. Like many Imperial worlds, its population had suffered terribly since the Great Rift's emergence. In their fright, many of Fox's people had turned to firebrands and demagogues, whose powerful message of survival through change appeared to offer the security the Imperium could not. Governor Hatia's planetary defense regiments were faced with rapidly increasing outbreaks of mutation and a multitude of cults devoted to what they called the One-Eyed Liege. One such cult, the followers of the Red Monarch, were responsible for dozens of atrocities, most notoriously the Eusebia tunnel collapse, which claimed over 30,000 lives. Meanwhile, the Cyclopeans, a cult whose members were noted for ritually putting out one of their own eyes in honour of their deity, launched an attack on the Calixtos spaceport, delaying promethium exports by several weeks. Freak events described by eyewitnesses as heretical sorcery and witchcraft became more common. The Lascari mine massacre, the Maliga refinery inferno, and the insanity of Hablock 27 Alpha were but a handful of instances in an ever-growing list of malign events. When the black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica failed to arrive according to their schedule, Fox was left with thousands of dangerous psychers in its custody. This was seen as an opportunity by the increasingly desperate governor, however. Against advice from her counsellors, Zula Hatia offered freedom to some of the psychers in exchange for their help in seeking out mutants and rogue witches. Those that did not comply, willingly or otherwise, were culled. The initial success of this campaign surprised even Governor Hatia. With the Psychers' aid, the followers of the Red Monarch were hunted down and destroyed by 4 regiments of the Hephosian phalanxery in the dense hab blocks of Zenora City's southwest district. The mutants of Titanium Shaft 67 were burned out by the Catachan 99th Land Sharks, and the 343rd Devil Hunters were temporarily stationed on the planet to provide jungle warfare training for the Hephosian regiments. The undersea mines of the Anthemian Trench were the site of fierce fighting between the cult of Chalconides and more than 30 companies of the Hephosian Tritons. Renowned combat aquanauts, the Tritons restored the mines to full function in a matter of weeks, leaving no heretic alive. Following the successes of her campaign up to that point, when a violently migrating mutant colony of hundreds of thousands was identified in the vast tunnel complexes beneath the Latonian subcontinent, Hatia was convinced that victory was inevitable. Infantry from 20 Hephosian phalanxery regiments were dispatched, alongside 7 regiments of Hephosian Klibinari replete with squadrons of thundering Leman Russ battle tanks, flame-belching hellhounds, and striding sentinels. A dozen allied regiments from other worlds were also allocated to what was expected to be a glorious battle. The braying mutants encountered by the combined Imperial forces were swiftly crushed, ground beneath armoured tracks, or cut down by waves of accurate las and heavy bolter fire. Nests and homesteads were purged with gouts of burning promethium or virulent flesh-melting toxins. However, soon the mutants' great numbers began to tell, and they pushed back. The sounds of battle-filled tunnels of every kind, from those so narrow that guardsmen could only walk them single file, to those wide enough for a company of Leman Russ tanks to drive through abreast. Vox signs were flooded with the screams of guardsmen being shredded by savage creatures, or tank crews crying for aid as their vehicles were swamped with deluges of noxious vomit. The clashes reached their peak intensity in the junctions where various tunnels met, amongst abandoned way stations and checkpoints. It was here too that the nature of the war on Haphos changed completely, and Governor Hattia learned just why the mutants fought with such unbridled savagery. They were fleeing something else. Something worse than the Astra Militarum forces that came to destroy them. Others dwelled in Latinian's nightmarish underworld, and they too sought the destruction of the mutants so that they could claim the planet for themselves. These other cults had bided their time, growing their strength with a patience and diligence unmatched by the mutants the Haphosian forces had faced so far. The first Imperial troops to encounter this new threat identified weaponized mining vehicles and Achilles Ridge Runners advancing at speed, its humanoid crew unleashing torrents of ammunition from rapid-firing weapons as they ran down those too slow to escape them. This unexpected foe attacked the Imperial forces immediately, catching them totally by surprise. Expecting a swift victory against an ill-disciplined enemy, Haphos's troops found themselves on the defensive against a highly organised and well-equipped force. Infantry platoons were encircled and outflanked by foes mounted on Atalan jackals before being pounced on by clawed, multi-limbed horrors clad in well-worn mining gear. Sentinel squadrons were beset by heavily muscled monstrosities that ripped open cockpits and tore apart the pilots. Conflicting reports claimed that this new foe was made up of traitors, xenos, or new strains of mutant. Some Imperial officers were in a position to rally their troops in time and take some initiative. The Bastion Breakers Lehman Russ Demolisher Company charged head-on into an onslaught of Goliath rock grinders. Such bravery cost the lives of all the tank crews, but stymied an assault that could have destroyed much of the 12th Ryatov Grenadiers, 5th and 6th Companies. The 81st Haphosian Klibanaries 2nd Hellhound Company raced at high speed to relieve trapped Pakuni Hearthguard, striking with such fury that not only were their allies rescued, but hundreds of cultists were incinerated by burning promethium. Some of these cultists were even successfully captured, though those that achieved this incredible feat were executed for unlawful contact with foes of the Imperium after their captives were taken away. Within a matter of hours the battle was over. The new enemy had slunk away and retreated despite their significant battlefield advantages. The mutant colony had indeed been destroyed, but thousands of Imperial troops were also slain, their broken bodies scattered over multiple battlefields. Hundreds of tank wrecks burned, the smog poisoning the thin subterranean air. Governor Hattia, denied her swift and magnificent victory, was shaken. Against all military advice, she withdrew her surviving troops rather than ordering a pursuit, hoping that this new foe would never be encountered again. Her regiments had scared them off. They would surely not return. But return they did. Simultaneous uprisings broke out across Haphos, each one with similar attributes. Repurposed civilian vehicles loaded with weaponry, many-limbed monsters with claws and wicked blades, and humanoid warriors clad in battered mining attire and wielding crude weapons. There was another common thread in that all focused particular attention on the planet's spaceport, in particular Eletrio, Haphos's largest. Hattia had little idea what kind of intelligence drove these creatures, but even a fool could see that their actions were no coincidence. They sought to escape. Hattia was determined that this would not happen, committing her generals to ensuring that the spaceports held. She could not risk the wider Imperium learning of what horrors her planet harboured and had allowed to fester in its depths. Eletrio was the size of a city. Its bustling docks supported thousands of commercial and military spacecraft and heaved with servitors, crews going about vital onshore business, and mysterious agents of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Vast landing pads sat amid storehouses packed with supplies ready to be dispatched off-world. Colossal fuel tanks kept the engines of Imperial trade running. Hab blocks for workers were everywhere, amongst workshops where machinery ceaselessly groaned, banged, and clanked. But the sounds of industry swiftly changed to sounds of battle. Alien chants and screeches met the battle oaths of Imperial priests and soldiery, and the air filled with the crack of lasguns, the roar of cannons, and the chug of repeating guns. A place of commerce and civility had become one of war. Where once merchants had discussed at length the finer details of their trade agreements, Imperial soldiers now patrolled, seeking to draw out their elusive foe. Where once goods were piled high, Genestealer cultists now hid, burrowed, and made their lairs. Vicious firefights broke out daily, and the smell of industry was replaced with the stench of rotting flesh. The insidious creatures laced many corridors with traps and used every known guerrilla tactic. Patrols were ambushed and destroyed, guardsmen ripped to shreds by bestial claws, and armoured columns fell into well-disguised tank traps filled with anti-armour mines. Infantry platoons reported being assaulted from all sides at once, many of them caught in deadly autogun crossfires, even as purple-skinned monsters rushed to tear them limb from limb. Others came under assault for scant minutes before their attackers broke off completely and disappeared, leaving no trace. Officer after officer was assassinated, their bodies found bearing hideous blade wounds or pistol shots to the head. Mines and other explosive devices became as prolific as the blood-sucking flies in the Leont marshlands, and thousands upon thousands of soldiers lost limbs to them. Areas swept clear of explosives were often found riddled with them again only days later, and without the oratory and zealotry of military priests or commissars, many of Hafth's senior officers expected their soldiers' morale to collapse beyond recovery. The governor's forces had advantages of their own, however. With the wealth of the planet behind them, they were able to bring formidable numbers and firepower to bear. Hatiar's generals sought to capitalise on this and draw the enemy into open battle, presenting them with weak forces acting as lures. When they attacked infantry companies placed deliberately as bait, whole gene cycles were wiped out by squadrons of roaring hellhounds and deadly Valkyrie gunships. The Hephosians mobilised forces large enough to sweep whole swaths of Eletrio in gigantic pincer movements. Infantry regiments and implacable armoured companies closed on certain areas of the spaceport like a vice, leaving their enemies no escape. Though these battles resulted in enormous losses for Hatiar's forces, as the cultists fought for their survival like frenzied, caged animals, the strategy's overall effectiveness was hard to deny. Once it had been fully implemented, it would only be a matter of time before Eletrio fell. The fighting remained arduous nonetheless. Blade-limbed Xenos cultists inflicted appalling damage, tearing apart Imperial infantry with frightening ease before they were put down. Hulking brutes wielding immense picks and hammers shrugged off all but the heaviest weapons fire as they crushed their enemies to pulp. An entire Thaxorillian guard regiment even fell to the Xenos taint, turning on their allies in a terrible surprise attack. It took months of grueling fighting to finally destroy them, in which time other units also had to be purged. The same corruption had somehow spread from the cultists to thousands of Imperial troops. Nevertheless, these were all but minor setbacks. The cultists had nowhere left to run. Eletrio was eventually judged secure, though sporadic fighting continued for months after the official declaration of victory. The port itself was now little more than a blasted ruin, many of the ships it had docked reduced to slag or barely valuable for scrap. Even with no other port under attack, it was doubtful that Hafos would be able to meet its tithe requirements for years. But Hatiar was optimistic. If they had won here, they could win elsewhere. They had been out of contact with the wider Imperium for years, and the governor believed that, if this state of affairs continued, she would be able to rebuild and produce enough resources to meet any requirements once contact was re-established. Just as Hatiar's first smile for many months appeared on her face, she received word. A Xenos fleet approached. It was the Tau. And now a small aside, a rediscovery of faith. The Tau first came to Hafos at the height of the fighting against the Genestealer cult uprising. Making their diplomatic overtures to Governor Hatiar directly, they explained that they were of the Water caste, one of 5 castes that made up their race. They identified Hafos' new threat as the Genestealer cults, explaining in detail how the Tau had engaged them on other worlds and how they wished to form a partnership with Imperial governors to defeat this most terrible threat. At this time, Hatiar was desperate. Everything she had ever known appeared to be crashing down around her, and her armies were nearly bled dry by myriad foes. The stars of the night skies had changed beyond all recognition. The Imperium was out of reach. The Xenos' proposal was a tempting one. They spoke persuasively, offering the victory, peace, and prosperity Hatiar desired so much. She questioned what the Imperium had ever done for her, what it was doing for her now. She was prepared to acquiesce to their offer when tidings were brought to her from an Imperial priest who had miraculously survived a terrific battle. The priest spoke of a Xenos foe that fought with advanced weaponry whilst clad in enormous warsuits. They had killed Imperial soldiery and gene-stealer cultists with equal impunity. Upon hearing this, Hatia spurned the Tau's offer of allegiance, stating emphatically that her loyalty to the Emperor was second to nothing and that she was a woman without price. She decried the duplicity of aliens and vowed that all would be wiped from the face of Haphos. Hatia saw the priest's survival and message as a sign from the Emperor himself. Her faith was restored and she took to directing the campaign for Haphos with renewed vigour. And the final chapter is called the Varothian Uprising, and that is how the Gene Stealer cultists play into the Psychic Awakening, the Greater Good.